Hey chickens, thank you for joining me here on my channel to revive the Grumpy Witch tag, which I think was a big deal about 4 months ago. Let me have a quick look at the search that I've done. Yeah, about 4 months ago, people started doing the Grumpy Witch tag. It was started by Rollerderbywitch. I really liked the tag. I enjoyed quite a few of the ones that I watched. I'm going to leave 3 or 4 of my favourites from people that did the Grumpy Witch tag down below. I meant to do it when it first came about, and I told Rollerderbywitch I was going to be doing it, and then I just didn't. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to get into it today. It's 10 questions in the tag. I'll also leave them down below. If anybody wants to do the tag themselves, I would love to watch more of these. I think these questions are really interesting, and I like the fact that we're going into the territory of things being frustrating or getting grumpy without practice or feeling lackluster, because you know what, that happens to everyone, and it's important, I think, to just be honest about it and be real about it and just be like, yeah, sometimes I feel like shit about my practice, and that's okay. Sometimes things don't interest me or spells don't work, and that's just a fact of life, you know, that's a fact of magical life, and I think that's a good thing to just be honest about and go into. So I think it's a clever tag. I think it's high time I did a tag as well. I've been thinking about doing a tag for a while, so I'm definitely gonna start brainstorming and thinking about that. But in the meantime, let me get on with Rollerderbywitch's 10 questions for the Grumpy Witch tag, guys. Okay, so question number 1. Do you have a least favourite time of year magically? I hated the summer for a long time. I was self-harming, miserable, didn't like the themes of summer. I didn't like the skin that's on show. I didn't like feeling like I had to dress a certain way, but I couldn't because I wanted to cover up my wounds on my arms. I was insecure about my body. I wanted to shroud myself in black, and I just wanted to keep to myself. And I felt like summer was much more sociable. It is much more sociable, and you show much more of yourself, and you know, you go out more and you talk more, and I just didn't like any of that stuff when I was growing up. When I was a teenager, summer was my least favourite time. It really wasn't fun for me. I didn't like being sweaty. My skin is very odd because it doesn't know whether it wants to be Aztec or Celtic, so it's just really confused all the time. Sometimes it goes in one direction, I tan beautifully, and the other, you know, the other half of the time, the Irish and Scottish comes out and I just burn. So it's just really confusing. And so that definitely, of course, fed into my perceptions of doing magic in the summertime and doing witchy things in the summertime. So for me, for a long time in my witchy life, I did not really like summer either. I didn't like the fact that it doesn't go dark for ages and ages and ages, and I felt like darkness was the more appropriate time to do magic and ritual and all that kind of thing. I didn't like the fact that you could light candles in your room at 10 o'clock at night and it still wouldn't really be candlelight in the room because you'd still be getting the last vestiges of sunlight outside. So I didn't like that. I used to love it when it went dark at like 4:30 in the afternoon, and I felt like I could do witchy things for longer. So it's really my perception more than anything else. It wasn't really the truth. You know, you can do witchy stuff at any time. You can work ritual and do spells at any time. But I always wanted to be under cover of darkness with candles, with no cars or people in the street, with everything very quiet. So that was one reason why summer was not great for me. Now, it still is my least favourite time of year in terms of being a witch and doing witchy things, but it's not a time of year that I despise anymore, like I did when I was a teenager. I have slowly grown to love summer for what it does provide me with. I have slowly grown to appreciate the season for what it does bring, but certainly autumn and winter for me are just times that I more lovingly associate with doing witchy stuff and with my witchy practice going well and being exciting and really popping. But definitely I do not resent summer anymore, and I do think it's cool that I can spend longer outside and I can really commune with nature, the green spaces and all the rest of it. I can sit by the sea for hours on end without thinking, fucking hell, I'm freezing my tits off, my nipples could cut glass. So that's nice. All of that stuff is really good. But yeah, autumn and winter I love. Summer is the least favourite, but I'm not gonna be down on summer. I'm not. God, this isn't grumpy so far. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I used to be really grumpy about summer, but now I'm okay with it and I just kind of accept it for what it is. Is there a herb that you don't like working with or never seems to work in your practice? I don't really work with herbs. If anything, in order to kind of make this into a grumpy witch video so that I'm not really, you know, positive about the whole thing and you actually do see some of my grumpiness. If anything, I never really liked it that I was made to feel like I should be working with herbs. On and off through my time of being a witch, I've just always felt like I should have loads of herbs in my witchy drawers, or I should have a herb collection, or you know, I don't know, I just always felt really kind of browbeaten in that way. And I never succumbed to it. I never was like, oh, well, I really need to be a herbalist now and have all these jars of herbs everywhere. It doesn't really inspire me. It doesn't really speak to me. I do keep some herbs in my collection and I do use them in spellcraft, but it's not really my big thing. And I think if anything, I have felt a little bit sore about the extent to which people over the years have expected me to be a herbalist and a green-fingered, you know, like a kitchen witch or a garden witch. And I have probably over the years slightly resented the image of a witch as being about that, especially in England, and people thinking that that's what I'm all about, or that's what witches are all about. And I'm kind of like, nah. That's not really for me. I definitely don't have any negative feelings about any herbs whatsoever. Can't think of anything that I could say I have a problem with in terms of herbs. And I do keep a small collection of herbs and seeds and things like that in my altar drawers. And I can't think of any negative experiences I've had with herbs or anything like that. It's just this perception that I should have some kind of a herb apothecary type thing, and it's just like, no, why? There's so many more ways to be a witch than that. And I guess I used to be irritated by the stereotype, I suppose you could say. Is there a stone or crystal that you don't like working with or never seems to add anything to your practice? This is question number 3. I like working with crystals quite a bit. I'm not a huge crystal witch, but I do have a collection. Actually, what I use crystals for predominantly is bringing certain themes, energies, intentions, vibes into my readings that I do for clients. And if you've ever had a reading from me, then you will know at the very least that I always use rose quartz, and I will have selected other stones for you as well, and I always explain what those stones mean and why I've got them there. So that's the main reason that I do keep a crystal collection which gradually expands. I have never purchased a crystal and thought, well, this is disappointing, or this is lackluster, or I can't really connect to this. I always find them to be useful. However, for some reason, I had a really shadowy block against selenite for a long time. And I remember at a certain point on my journey with watching YouTube videos and being interested in witchy content and stuff like that, I remember just hearing the word selenite over and over again. And I don't know if this was because people were purchasing selenite a lot at the time, like maybe a witch or 1 or 2 big witches mentioned selenite and then everybody was getting selenite and it just became a thing, or if it was just the fact that my consciousness was picking up on it so much more. Or maybe I don't know, maybe I was watching videos of people that do work with crystals more, and that's why I kept hearing selenite. But every time that I saw it, or I saw it in a crystal grid, or I saw people talking about the energies of it, I didn't like it. I was just like, something about selenite rubbed me up the wrong way, and it was as though I just kind of thought, that stone's not for me. That doesn't sound like the kind of vibe that I really like. But then, you know what, I bought a few pieces of selenite and started using them for client readings and connecting to them. And I have to say, apart from the fact that it sheds like fuck and you've got to really leave it in its own little area, it can't really bump up against any other stones because it just goes meh, dandruff everywhere, selenite dandruff everywhere. Apart from that, I really like it. It's a really good, awesome, high vibe crown chakra stone, no problems at all. Glad that I've got it in my collection. And I think it's interesting for me that I had that shadowy response to it in the beginning. That's something that I like to look into. That's something that I like to look at and think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder, you know, what it was that made me feel shadowy about that stone, and what it was that made me feel like I don't want to work with this stone isn't for me, kind of thing. So yeah, I had a crappy feeling about selenite, but then I decided that the best way to kind of see if it really was a stone for me or not was actually to purchase some and work with it. And I do really like it, and I do use it for my client readings. But as I said, the selenite dandruff, I could definitely do without that, and that has made me grumpy. It did make me grumpy for the first time realising how fragile that stone actually is. I like pulled it out of its bag, and it had been kind of like gathered together with some other stones, and I pulled it out of the bag and was like, oh, I can't really, you know, I've got to treat this stone with kid gloves. I can't really like do any, you know, can't put it with the rest of the stones or anything like that. It's got to have its own little place, you know. Question number 4, is there anything that bothers you about your deity or your practice? Oh yeah, oh blimey. How long have you got? Okay, things that bother me about my deity, yes. Oh, I'm going to get grumpy now. Whew. Guys, As many of you will know, I do have a matron deity. Now, that's not to say that I don't work with other deities, that I have no interest in other deities. Actually, half my altar visually, or a big part, like, you know, the whole back quarter of my altar is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, the Blessed Mother, and I work with her a lot as well. And I work with other archetypes and stuff. So certainly I am not exclusively a daughter of hell to the detriment of all other disembodied intelligences. But hell is definitely, you know, the one that I am ride or die for, and I have been with her for a long time. And I definitely have some things that bother me about the fact that hell is my matron. Yeah, first of all, hell is not a major goddess by any stretch of the imagination. You can find, you know, her in a pretty awesome story, actually, involving Balder, and, you know, you either know it or you don't, right, where Balder dies and he goes into the underworld and they have to have this negotiation to get him back. And I love that story. That story is really close to my heart, really important to me. You can find mentions of hell in the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. You can find mentions of hell elsewhere. Mentions of hell, mentions of her realm, mentions of her guard dog and that kind of thing. But there are no other stories. No, you know, she's not really involved in any stories aside from the one with Balder. And what I have found ever since I first mentioned that hell was my matron, maybe back in 2012 or something like that, a long time ago, I found that people have consistently emailed me and sent comments to me and sent private messages to me asking me for as much information as I can give them about hell. Now, this might happen to other people who follow much more major goddesses than me, goddesses that have loads of stories attached to them, goddesses that have loads of cultural context behind them. I don't know. So it might not necessarily be the fact that hell is not necessarily a principal goddess in the Norse pantheon that does this, but I have a feeling that it is because there is not that much hard and fast information attached to her. She's not mentioned that much. I have a feeling that that's why people have come to me over time, over and over again, asking me these questions. And so it's that really that has gotten me a little flustered in the past at various times. Hasn't happened for quite a while, actually, but there was several years there where people were really like, what do you know about hell? Where can I read about hell? Are there any other stories with hell? What are the texts that she's mentioned in? What exactly does it say in those texts? I can see on Wikipedia that she's mentioned in these texts, but I can't find the direct quotes for these texts. And it just used to drive me mental, because it was like, you know what, number one, have your own experiences with her. We have built a lot on the image of her in culture over time. You know, the way that we perceive her now can never be anything like the Norse people perceived her. You know, so much has changed, even in fact to the point where I'm pretty sure that the Norse people are likely to have perceived her as being a maiden on the top, a living woman on the top, and actually a skeleton from the waist down. So already the image that we have of her now in popular modern culture is a huge departure from that. You know, we see her now as split down the middle, living woman on this side and skeleton on the other side. I think that is the much more appropriate way in terms of symbolism and the idea of light and shadow and conscious and unconscious and persona and soul and, you know, all of that chisel. But just even that, the fact that we've departed so much from how it's very likely that the Norse people would have thought of her, it's just, you know, we need to go on our own journeys. And one thing that I will tell you is that the central story that we have that has hell in it, with Balder and so on, that is a very revealing story. There's so many layers to that story. I'm still not done thinking about what that story means. That story is such an unbelievable riddle. But the experiences I've had with her, actually traveling to her realm, actually going there and being with her and being in her energy and thinking about what she means to me and why her archetype speaks to me, that teaches me so much more. But at the same time, yes, I have gone on that journey to read the direct quotes. Yes, I have found the translations. Yes, I learned a long time ago everything that I could suck out, the marrow that I could get out of the stuff that has actually been written about her and when it was written. Yeah, I've gone and done that work, and because she's such an elusive goddess with so little that has been written down about her, I do feel like sometimes somebody finds a person that works with hell and they're just like, right, it's your responsibility now to tell me everything you know. about her. I just kind of think to myself, it's worthwhile doing the work. It's definitely worthwhile going into this stuff and researching it and confirming it for yourself rather than necessarily asking someone. And I do touch on that actually in the video that I made recently about community and group dynamics and such. So it's interesting that it's coming up here as well with this tag. But you know, it is worthwhile to actually do the work to discover these things for yourself, and that's how they go in better rather than asking someone who has done the work herself. But second of all, it's not just about the hard and fast information you can get from the resources from that time. You know, it's about going into yourself, having those experiences with her as a dynamic, living, disembodied intelligence. And to me, that's really where the meat and potatoes of the thing has come into it. So yeah, that makes me grumpy in terms of being grumpy about my deity, definitely. And what makes me grumpy about my practice, to be honest with you, just how complicated it becomes sometimes and how much I want to do with it, and just being confused about when it's time to simplify or hold off from exploring certain things and just focus on the things I'm exploring at any given time. It's hard to know when to strip my practice back. It's hard to know when to allow elements to come in. Sometimes you can't help it. You have to let an element in. It just keeps rapping at the door and it just won't leave you alone. And you have to let it in. You have to start researching it, or, you know, meditating on it and just letting it flow into you, and you can't stop. But there are other things where I am very much a magpie, you know, shiny things that make me go, ooh, ooh. I want to go into them. I want to research them. And I fall in love very easily as well. I fall in love all the time with different deities and concepts and thoughts and mishmashes of different things that I've thought up in my mind. And I'm constantly kind of having to sort of negotiate with myself a little bit, because my practice is so much what I want it to be and what I feel I want it to grow into. And so sometimes I have to be a little bit disciplined and kind of crack my own whip and say, look, you know, you're focusing on these things, and if you start letting all of this other stuff in, you're going to stretch your focus so thin that you're not really going to see results in any real way. So it's about me kind of paring things back to the essentials sometimes, going back to the basics sometimes, and realizing that sometimes as well I'm just thirsty for something that isn't to do with concepts or deities or any of that stuff. It's something else. It's something elsewhere in my life that just needs tweaking or changing or looking at. And sometimes I realize that things are becoming very, very flowery in my practice, very confusing, very over the top, very convoluted in a way. And I realize it's because things need to be straightened out and simplified elsewhere in my mundane world, you know, in the rest of my reality. And that's interesting, because I tend to find that my practice, my spiritual practice, and the rest of my life, there's a conversation going on there, and sometimes I just need to look at it and go, oh, okay, so I don't actually need to focus on these things really in spirituality. I actually need to get things sorted out here. That's where the issue is. And then things kind of balance out again. But as much as I will say that it does make me grumpy, I will say at the same time that it's very interesting and it's very illuminating. It is a journey of self-discovery, but definitely sometimes things can just get a bit too over the top. And like, one thing that makes me grumpy about my practice sometimes is I wish I had so much more room. I really do. I really want so many more altars. I want to focus more on the divine masculine, and the way that my altar is set up is just it's just so much about goddess energy. But I really can't deny, and I wouldn't want to deny, the healing that has been derived for me over the last 4 years or so from working with the masculine, just thinking about the masculine in psycho-spiritual terms, thinking about what it means to me, what it could mean to me. It's been really useful. And yeah, sure, there are a million other paradigms. We don't just need to look at gender roles and gender binary and what that means in terms of energy and what that means in terms of, you know, gods and goddesses, deities, whatever. Everybody is where they are in their spirituality, and I think just because somebody is focusing a lot for an extended period on the paradigm of feminine and masculine doesn't mean in any way that they're trying to be exclusionary. It doesn't mean that they are trying to say that there is something more sacred about this paradigm than there is about any other. And that's not what I'm trying to say, but I'm definitely trying to say that it has been hugely illuminating and healing for me as a human being. And the whole point of designing your own spiritual journey is that you're supposed to go where you find interest, where you would find healing, where you would be challenged, and where you would elevate your perspective. And for me, working with masculine and feminine over the last 4 years has been mind-blowing. So I would love to have an altar for the divine masculine. I really, really would. I would love to have different altars and shrines and stuff, different areas of focus. I'm feeling more like altars and shrines and places I can go to really focus are helpful for me and desirable to me more than they used to be. Even though, of course, I still fully subscribe to the notion that it's all in your mind and you can have astral altars in your mind and all of that stuff. I still fully subscribe to all of that, of course, but I really want more actual locations. I want more places, you know. It could be that could get really complicated and I wouldn't want that in the end, but I'd love to be able to try it out a little bit and have sort of a few more different places with very different themes, and still have my main altar. So it remains to be seen. When I move to a bigger place and I start to get more room to play around with, I may or may not feel called then to do what I now think I want to do in my brain box, you know. It's quite a different matter when you do have more room and you suddenly think, you know what, I'm not actually interested in the reality of keeping loads of altars, never mind. But at the moment, something that makes me grumpy is that I can't really have that, and it just really annoys me. Question number 5, what do you do when a spell doesn't work? When a spell doesn't work, I mean, it's such a difficult question, because what kind of spell and for what kinds of reasons and how urgent is it, you know? So different things really, depending. Sometimes if a spell doesn't work, I just immediately get on with tweaking it so that I think it will work better. So I look back at the recording of what I've actually done, the account of what I actually did with the spell, how long ago it was. And then if I really want to activate something, if I want to get something moving straight away, I just tweak the spell in any way that I can think that it would need to be tweaked, and I just redo it. With other spells, it's not really of great urgency, you know, so the fact that it hasn't worked is more interesting for me than it is frustrating. It's more something to think about and ponder on, rather than something that I really need to take action to rectify. So it depends what the circumstances are. If I need to take action to rectify and I need to be go, go, go because I want that green smoothie, that cosmic green smoothie for the run that I'm on, which is what I think that a spell is, then I'll just remake the green smoothie with a little bit less wheatgrass or a little bit more spirulina. I'm really going there with the green smoothie analogy, but you know what I mean. I tweak something. So for example, I might tweak or change the moon phase. I might actually decide to redo the spell with a completely different paradigm. So if I was doing candle magic, then I might use the same words, the same moon phase, the same correspondences, but I might choose to switch to sympathetic magic, for example, you know, or tarot magic, whatever. So I'm using a different paradigm. Maybe I'm thinking that might sort of get the potential flowing and get the energy flowing better. So I'm thinking about what I can be tweaking. I'm looking at the account of what I did in the first place and thinking, how can I make it juicier? How can I play with it so that it's got more potential? Whereas that secondary kind of spell, where it's not really so important that it hasn't worked, it's not time sensitive per se, it's not really, you know, it's not giving me a hard time that it doesn't really seem to have come to anything, I can just sort of reflect on that a bit and just let myself sort of let myself become absorbed in the contemplations I'm having about it, and I might not even redo it. There have been times where a spell has not quite come together the way that I wanted it to. Either the results have been lackluster or they didn't really appear at all, and I have thought to myself, there's a reason for that. I'm very much about doing spellcraft in the sense of this thing that I'm casting for, or whatever is in my highest good. Because I do acknowledge that sometimes what my ego wants is not necessarily what my spirit needs, and that there are other variables at work that I may not necessarily be seeing and I cannot see from my limited human perspective. So I really do leave it open to ensuring that I can also invite any energies or results in that I need that would be good for me, but maybe I don't know that I need them. Maybe I'm not aware that I need them, but I do. So I very much leave my spellcraft open to that, and sometimes when a spell doesn't come together, it does occur occur to me that maybe that is for good reason, and maybe it is something that I just need to kind of sleep on and think on more, or maybe not take any action on whatsoever. And so I definitely do take that into account as well. Question number 6, have you ever done a meditation or astral work that did nothing for you? Yeah, totally, absolutely. The false starts that I have with astral work have normally been because my biorhythms aren't really correct. I have to be quite strong physically to do the kind of astral work that really gleans results for me, and that really is effectual for me. So I need to be properly hydrated. I need to have had enough hours sleep. I need to be well fed. You know, there needs to be a lot of physical strength for me to be able to do astral travel. And also I need to kind of not have anything else on my mind. So if there's like tasks that are unfinished, or if I'm waiting on something, if I'm waiting on a phone call or something of that nature, there's just a lot of bits and bobs, that loose ends that need to be tied up, I probably won't have the best experience for astral work, to be honest with you. And that's normally the case as well for things like deep shadow work too. I feel like I need to be fed, watered, looked after, and other things need to be sorted out before I really go into what I would consider to be deep shadow work, where I really commit myself to like an hour session, a 90-minute session. So yeah, astral work, definitely. I've had some sort of short circuits. I short circuit in my astral work. So I get to a certain point, usually I get to my astral doorway, which is always the same doorway. It's always the same doorway that I always see. It's the same astral jumping point that I've always seen. Since I was a child, in fact, I've been seeing this exact place. And normally it will be the case that I will just, there'll be a glitch. It's like I just keep seeing that and being there and about to go further. It's like a 3 of Wands kind of feeling, where you're about to like step into the new terrain, and I'm like about to do it, but something is not gelling, something is not fitting together, and it's glitchy, and there's like a static to it, and I'm just like, no, this isn't working. I'm not fully pushing off. I'm not fully pushing off, and I will just stop. I will just abandon ship. In terms of meditation, I feel like meditation is one of those things where every single meditation is worthwhile to do, and every single meditation has its own boons, its own merits, and I'm never unhappy that I did a meditation. Any time spent in meditation is time well spent. None of it is a waste to me. So having said that though, there is a huge spectrum of different possibilities when it comes to meditation. Some of the meditations that I've done have just been so lackluster and frustrating. I've had an itch on my body that was just, I just kept focusing on it, or it just wouldn't go away, or I've just had this one thing on my mind over and over again, or there's a dog barking incessantly, or whatever, you know. There's loads of meditations like that, or meditations where I've got a bit of an achy back, my injury is playing up, you know. Or meditations where I'm falling asleep. I've done so much meditation at this point in my life that the variables are just unbelievable. But it's never a waste of time. Some of them are more satisfying, some of them are less satisfying. Sometimes I've sat and it has been like, it's like it's shifted my DNA. Other times I've sat and I've just sort of thought, well, you know, I sat. That's about all I can say about it. Question number 7. Is there an element that just doesn't work for you? No, no, there isn't an element that doesn't work for me. I get the 4 elements and I understand, you know, symbolically how they fit together and how they're used in magic and how they're viewed in magic and stuff like that. But I guess the concept of the 4 elements in magic doesn't really work for me, you know. I've never had them represented on my altar space, for example. They've never held a huge place in my heart as far as magic and ritual and altar setup is concerned. They have never been of huge interest to me, other than maybe when I'm thinking about the kind of magic that I want to do, and I kind of think about potentially for magic that for a spell that I want to bring to manifestation more slowly, in a more gradual but a more long-lasting way, I may choose to use you know, ingredients that are connected more with earth, for example, whereas for a very quick result, for something instantaneous, I might choose to use fire in the spell in some way. So I suppose other than that though, I'm not really that inspired by the 4 elements as a concept. That particular paradigm isn't really what I'm about. I wouldn't say I'm grumpy about it, but actually the 4 elements as a concept in magic is not something that I feel particularly drawn to. Question number 8. How do you get out of a witchy rut? Really good question. You know, there's so many different ways, because for me, getting out of a spiritual rut is a lot like getting out of an artistic rut, you know, a creative rut. I feel like the things that I do to get myself out of a creative rut are very similar to what I do to get out of a spiritual rut. So I read inspirational things, I have a look at what other people are doing, I think about aesthetics, I read interesting quotations, I just try to get myself out of my own way, start to imbibe different kinds of things, different resources, and just kind of see how that makes me feel. I step outside of what it is that I've been doing that is familiar, and I move into new territory. I tend to find that this very much brings me out of my witchy rut in much the same way as I do the same kinds of things to bring me out of the creative rut. I go in search of fresh blood. I go in search of new things that are inspiring, that feel interesting to me, and I see how that makes me feel, and if that makes me want to do something. I also tend to find, though, that I like to accept a witchy rut sometimes and just see it for what it is. Sometimes you just need to stop for a while and maybe not be so, maybe not practice so frequently, maybe have a break with the level of consistency that you've been giving to something. Sometimes spirit just steps in and says, you know what, if you step back and stop doing things, you're really going to begin to download some useful and important messages, and you're going to get those keen insights that are going to push you on to the next level. Also, I think sometimes spirit just steps in and says, you know what, you've got quite a lot of real world stuff to deal with, and although yes, a little bit of spiritual practice is going to be helping you, the extent to which you want to engage is actually a distraction from what you should be doing over here in consensus reality. And sometimes that can be a little bit of your own internal guidance system telling you that you're not supposed to be spending hours upon hours at the altar, you're not supposed to be designing elaborate rituals, you're not supposed to be doing that. You're actually supposed to be confronting and dealing with this stuff that's going on, and maybe just doing a little bit of magic or ritual, or just a small spiritual daily practice to prepare you for, you know, whatever you need to set up and knock down in the real world, kind of thing. So when a witchy rut comes along, I do often also remind myself that it may not necessarily be that I need to immediately get myself out of it. And I think this is true with a creative block as well. Like, obviously with things like a long-term creative block where you really cannot get a groove in the wood, that's something that needs to be dealt with, and that's something where you can go on an exploration to get that creativity back. But when it comes to, you know, just a short-term block, or you were working on a project and suddenly, you know, your desire to work on it is gone, you're feeling a bit lackluster, sometimes that can be a sign that you just need a break. Or sometimes, you know, it can be a sign of overwork or burnout. Sometimes it can just be that you need a little bit of a kind of a break between activities so you can look at things differently and do things differently, and then come back to it feeling refreshed, or feeling as though you have a better angle on it than you did before. Okay, question number 9. How do you deal with life getting in the way of your practice? Essentially what I do is I always say to myself that 5 minutes of practice is better than no practice at all. I used to be a very all or nothing person. I used to be really over the top. I used to overextend myself. I used to make these great big commitments, and everything sort of had to look and feel how I wanted it to look and feel in order for it to be like worthwhile or legitimate to me. So I would really plan and be super over the top with whatever I was wanting to do spiritually, you know, and I think often it wouldn't occur to me that sometimes life won't allow for that, and I need to be flexible. Over time, I've really come to realise how much my day can be positively affected by only just a very, very small amount of spiritual practice and contemplation. So even just, you know, burning a stick of incense and saying some words of power in front of the mirror in the morning, chanting in the shower, doing a 10-minute meditation, using an app if necessary. If I'm feeling really flustered and as though I can't just focus on the breath, just using an app, you know, like the Headspace app, for example. And I've had the opportunity to see over time how much positive impact that has, just that tiny little thing. So I've come to this point in my journey where it's no longer about really overcommitting and overextending myself so much. It's more about realizing that even just a little bit of spiritual practice does the world of good, you know, and I can actually kind of stop pressuring myself to do loads and loads, and just realize that 5 minutes or 10 minutes of something is better than nothing at all, and actually can be a lot more effective than I'm sometimes willing to tell myself. Question number 10, the final question in the Grumpy Witch tag. When you have all of these negative feelings about your practice, what do you do? You know, when I have negative feelings about my practice, and I think this is something I've said before on the channel, I do check in with how the rest of life is going as well, because I do think things are very much interconnected, and it's not always about my spiritual practice. Sometimes I can convince myself that it is, but it's actually about something else. And usually when it's connected to something else in another area of my life, it is within an area of my life where I can take action to make improvements. So anywhere where I can find that I can take action to improve something, I will do that. So if I'm feeling really down about my spiritual practice, I tend to take a look at what the root of that you know, issue is, and then I have a look if there's anywhere else in my life where I also feel the same, or any other roots in my life from which this dissatisfaction with my spirituality could be stemming from. And then I think about what I can do. I think about the actions that I can take, you know, and I think about how I can choose differently in order to stop this from coming up and being a problem. The main ways in which I tend to feel negative about my practice are wishing that I could spend more time practicing, feeling like the consistency is not there. You know, if I fuck up with my consistency, if I'm not as regular with things, that tends to bother me. I tend to just feel as though I have wasted time that I could have spent at my altar doing things, you know, experiencing things. So really it's about that. And so a lot of the time when I feel negative about that, I just have to say to myself, you know what, a lot of the stuff that you do in the day, Kelly, is actually spiritual in nature. What I do for a living is incredibly spiritual in nature. And I do have amazing spiritual experiences often from doing readings and sessions for clients and working with clients and hanging out with people that follow my work on social media, getting into really interesting conversations, reading the comments down below my videos, all of that kind of thing. I have the privilege, the very great privilege of being immersed in this passion of mine, or this collection of passions of mine, all day every day. So I do sort of say to myself, if I overextend myself with work, or if I've got work and social stuff and house stuff going on and I feel like I don't get to spend the time I want at my altar, or I don't write long entries in my book of mirrors, or I wake up and I immediately find I've got to do things and I don't meditate, or I don't do a card draw, you know, I don't actually go and sit at my altar because things are just too haphazard and I've got too much going on, I will try not to fixate on that. And I will try to just remind myself that I still have been open to spiritual experiences from the moment I opened my eyes and was conscious of being awake. And sometimes things don't go down the way I want them to, but that doesn't mean that it has been a failure in terms of spiritual practice and spiritual contemplation and bringing myself into focus, psycho-spiritually speaking. So I could go on all night about this. These questions have been really interesting to answer. Again, if you would like to answer these questions and get involved with the Grumpy Witch tag, if you want to bring it back to life, I will leave the questions down below. And please also be aware that I actually offer a solitary witch reading, guys. This is a classic reading in my online store that I've offered for quite a while now, and I absolutely love this reading. I love doing it for people. Whenever somebody orders Solitary Witch, I can't wait to get to it in my queue, because I really just enjoy these spread positions, and it's just been sort of revamped a little bit. I've updated the description and everything so that you can get a sense of the Solitary Witch readings vibe and themes and why it might be good for you. So if you're doing your thing as a Solitary Witch, if you are trying to carve out the practice that works for you, if you're confused about the framework, if you're new and you just want to kind of wade in with a really empowered perspective and you would like a reading, Solitary Witch could be a really good option for you. So I'll definitely link that down below as well. So much love until next time, chickens. Blessed be.